It's time for the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast.
On this edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast, we have another week of college football to talk about, plus NFL and fantasy football files. All that and so much more. Stay tuned.
I'm glad you connected. This is Dave Johnson, voice of the Washington Wizards. You have connected to the right place because you are listening to my man, Josh Kirby, on Sports Podcast.
All righty, riding solo with you this week on the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast. You know me, I'm Josh Kirby. As always, we're part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network. Make sure you find Quentin and his team, www.mayoplease.com. Streaming on all platforms, and you can find them on Twitter via the Mayo Please. So that, and we are also sponsored by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you find a bag today inside your local Martin's, Food Lion, and Giant stores. And we are also sponsored by PM Plus Reserves. As always, thanks to JR Beats Official, MPT Now Productions, and Dave Johnson as always. So hope you all are having a good day or night whenever you might be listening to this podcast. Mixing things up a little bit here, I'm actually recording on Sunday night. Third quarter going on, Dallas and New Orleans right now, hoping New Orleans pulls out the win. But I'm not going to get into the reasoning behind why I'm recording Sunday night. But if I like it, this might become a regular thing, recording on Sunday night, so all the games are sort of fresh in my head, if you know what I mean, so yeah, because I have the games on Sunday Ticket, I'm watching everything, then I talk about it that night, so I'm not going to get into much detail, but there is a reason for me recording on Sunday night this segment. So without further ado, let's get right into it. First, I want to talk about some quick college football scores, ones I found intriguing to college football this past weekend. First off, Notre Dame knocking off UVA in their undefeated season. So UVA falls to 4-1 after Notre Dame beating them 35-20. UVA looked like they had a great night. Their quarterback had 334 yards, and on the other side of the ball for Notre Dame, their quarterback only had 165 yards. So the stats don't look too promising towards Notre Dame from what I've seen. I didn't really watch much of the game, but Notre Dame gets that win. And another two ACC opponents, Clemson almost gets upset by UNC. And in the college football rankings, I was talking to somebody earlier about this, that it doesn't help unless you get blown out. So Clemson, number 1 overall, beat UNC by a point. So this is probably going to knock them down on the rankings. But, the whole ranking system is just ridiculous. I can't believe it sometimes, what they call and whatnot. But a very close game. It looked like for a while UNC was just going to take it, and Clemson could not come back. But they ended up hanging on and winning the football game. Stats for both teams, pretty consistent, nothing eye-popping, record-shattering, just a close ACC ball game. So that's some of the ACC for you. Let's look down into the SEC really quick. Texas A&M in a close one against Arkansas, 31-27. Not really any other big scores. Alabama, as you know, is 5-0. Whoop-de-doo. Going back through into the Big 12, you had Baylor winning against Iowa State University 23-21. Oklahoma State beating 24-ranked Kansas State University 26-13. And Jalen Hurts beating Texas Tech University, Oklahoma 55-16. But Jalen Hurts just looks incredible after these 4 games they have played. 415 yards in this game, only 1 interception. Jalen Hurts made the right move by transferring to Oklahoma. And I think Oklahoma has really been blessed by Jalen Hurts' presence as a quarterback on this football team. So that's just a little bit of my nuggets there. And ACC, Virginia Tech, heartbreaking loss on Friday to Duke, 45-10. Pittsburgh squeaks one out against Delaware. And Florida State University beats NC State. So sort of some scores, nothing really big, but those 2 ACC games, Clemson and UNC, and Notre Dame upsetting UVA, in my opinion. So that wraps up our college football scoreboard. Now it's time to get into some NFL Week 4 action for you. So some scores, running it all down from Week 1. Tennessee beating Atlanta 24-10. Cleveland over Baltimore 40-25. New England over Buffalo 16-10. Kansas City over Detroit 34-30. Carolina over Houston 16-10. The New York Giants over the Washington Redskins 24-3. The Oakland Raiders over the Indianapolis Colts 31-24. The Los Angeles Chargers over the Miami Dolphins 30-10. Seattle over Arizona 27-10. And Tampa Bay over Los Angeles 55-40. Chicago over Minnesota 16-6. Jacksonville squeaks one out 26-24. And that Thursday night game, Philadelphia over Green Bay 34-27. So, starting it off, I want to talk about the Thursday night game, how Aaron Rodgers and the Packers looked so strong. Then the Eagles came back and beat the Packers. It was a close back and forth game. The Packers looked like they had the Eagles handled from the first half of the game. Then the momentum shifted around like the mid of the third quarter, I want to say. Carson Wentz, 160 yards passing with 3 touchdowns. But Jordan Howard's a guy I want to get into. He is a good rusher coming over from Chicago. He did a really good job in that game and couldn't compare with the Packers' numbers rushing. Jones only had 21 yards rushing, and Aaron Rodgers was the lead rusher in that game. Rodgers, he played a heck of a great game. 422 yards with 2 touchdowns, only 1 interception. But the thing about it is Aaron Rodgers still looks good, but the Packers got upset at home. And after last week, the Eagles losing to the Detroit Lions, this was a game I did not expect at all. The Eagles defeating the Packers at Lambeau Field. And the Eagles improved to 2-2 with that, but coming off of a loss to the Detroit Lions, and turning around to a Thursday night game, that is very hard to do, and that's why this game was very, very interesting to me to see the Eagles come out with the win in that game. So, moving on, I want to talk about Cleveland and Baltimore. obviously 40-25. Last week, Cleveland did not look that good at all. Looking back, Cleveland lost to the Rams. Granted, it was the Rams, 20-13, but they really didn't play their best football. But they came out against the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, and they won a football game. There's a lot of people writing the Browns off, and they're coming back just playing good physical football. They're just doing their job. There's nothing really special about them yet, but it was a surprise to see this score on the scoreboard. Baker Mayfield had a heck of a game, only incompleting 10 passes, 20 for 30, 342 yards with a touchdown and an interception. And on the other side, Lamar Jackson, 247 yards. But Nick Chubb, I want to talk about 165 yards on the ground. That's going to do it for the Browns, obviously. Great game by Nick Chubb all around. Fantasy owners, you should be proud to have Nick Chubb on your team this week. But Cleveland, I thought this would be a closer game, and I thought Baltimore would get the upper hand, but I guess not. So Cleveland takes that one, 40-25. So moving right along, Atlanta. What's up with Atlanta? Matt Bryant in particular, the Falcons kicker, I know it's just a kicker, but still, he's missed a ton of field goals for the Falcons so far this year, and they lost to the Tennessee Titans 24-10. And if Matt Bryant came out of retirement and continuing to kick for the Falcons, and it's proven that he should have stayed in retirement. Missing field goals in key moments of the game, and just missing out on points for the Falcons. So that's all I'll get into on that. Kansas City and Detroit. Here's the next one I want to go into. Great game. There were like 4 or 5 lead changes throughout the entire game, if I'm correct. The Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, surprising stat, Pat Mahomes did not have a touchdown pass in this game, which I find it hard to believe with Travis Kelce, Sammy Watkins, and you don't have Tyreek Hill, one of his primary weapons, but you have Kelce and Watkins, and I was very surprised to see not a single touchdown pass on the board for the Chiefs. Matt Stafford with 3 touchdown passes looked really good, and the Lions are keeping games close with these good teams. You saw last week they beat the Eagles. This week they lost by 4, almost mounting a comeback, but the Hail Mary failed by Detroit. But Kansas City, they almost got a loss. Hands down, they almost got a loss. And I think this was a learning experience for Pat Mahomes that he handled very well. And I'm glad he handled it well, because I think Pat Mahomes is going to be a future Hall of Famer at this rate. If he can keep up his production, stay healthy, and be the quarterback that he is, he's a leader for this team. He's like a leader because he knows how to handle the situations. It's proven after this game, in my opinion, he knows how to handle the situations. He can't handle all the situations, but he is looking pretty darn good. And I like the direction the Chiefs are heading in this game. Quick note, Oakland upsetting Indianapolis. Jacoby Brissett, take a look at his numbers, 265 yards with 3 touchdowns. But that was a score I was surprised about. Not a lot to talk about in that game. Chicago is the next one. They beat Minnesota 16-6. Another game where I'm starting to realize that Kirk Cousins is not worth the money. And a surprising thing about this game, Mitch Trubisky went out. in the first quarter. I believe it was a shoulder injury. Screwed my fantasy team over. Not sure about yours. Chase Daniel came in 22 for 30, 195 yards and a touchdown. The Bears with Chase Daniel get the victory over the Vikings 16-6. And what a game. I mean, the Vikings are struggling as a team. I believe at the quarterback position, Dalvin Cook, only 35 yards and a touchdown. He didn't really produce much this game, hands down. And it's got to change. Minnesota's got to be in the air, on the ground, both. If one aspect of the game is lacking, they're not going to have a good game. That's what I've seen from the Vikings so far this season. So Chicago, great win with the backup Chase Daniel. And in a division game, too, at Soldier Field. You know, it's hard to win at Soldier Field, and they proved that they can be the Vikings with a backup quarterback. But that could all change when Chicago goes to Minnesota. The Rams get upset by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Who saw this coming? I didn't. I was looking. I was like, the Buccaneers are looking pretty good. And, you know, the Buccaneers are 2-2. Who would have thought the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would beat the Rams after last week losing by a point to the New York Giants because they backed their kicker up off a delay of game penalty and missed the kick? I guess they had fuel in the fire and they wanted to get a good win. And Jameis Winston looked amazing. I'm surprised about this game, hands down. 28 for 41, 385 yards, 4 touchdowns. Who would have thought Jameis Winston could put up 4 touchdowns? And you have Jared Goff on the other hand. These quarterback stats are amazing. This reminds me of the Chiefs-Rams game where it ended up in a 54-51 final on Monday Night Football. You have Jared Goff completing 45 of his 68 pass attempts for 517 yards. This was a back-and-forth ball game all around. This was a quarterback's game from these stats right here. There was basically nothing done on the ground for these two teams. It was all done in the air. Jared Goff, the 3 interceptions really hurt the Rams. Jameis only had 1. That was towards the end of the game every time the Rams tried coming back. But a key thing for the Rams, they got to protect the football. And Jared Goff did not do a good job towards the end of the game protecting the football. And Ndamukong Suh ran a scoop and score to seal the deal after Jared Goff gets pressured and fumbles the football. So I'm not sure. Rams are probably going to go back to the drawing board. Sean McVay, I know he's a good coach and he'll get this worked out for the next week, but very surprised Tampa Bay beat the Rams there. Jacksonville and Denver, 26-24. Gardner Minshew looks like a really good quarterback in the league. Looking very, very good so far. 213 for 2 touchdowns, 19 on 33 for the quarterback. The Broncos, we've seen this before with the Bears, kicking a game-winning field goal at Mile High to beat the home-standing Denver Broncos. So it's a surprise. Joe Flacco has seen some promise. I've seen some promise in him, but the Broncos cannot complete games fully. That's the thing, and that's why the Jaguars came back, and that's why the Bears came back. Their defense doesn't look that great either, so the Jags got the win there. Another game-winning field goal in Mile High Stadium. So Carolina over Houston today. I was surprised about that. I thought Deshaun Watson would be playing a little bit better than that, but and I'm not even going to get into this Washington-New York Giants game except for the fact that Dwayne Haskins came in for the Washington Redskins finally. I knew that he would be coming in. I didn't think this early. He was obviously not ready. He threw 3 interceptions in the game, along with one by Case Keenum on the first drive of the game. And the Redskins are a mess. They need to clean house. And Dwayne Haskins wasn't ready to go. Jay Gruden put him in way too early. So that wraps it up. Week 4. We still have a Monday night game to be played. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. I'll get you updated on that either on the podcast or on our Twitter page at Kirby on Sports. So New Orleans leading Dallas 12-10. Sunday night football as we are recording this podcast. But that wraps up my Week 4 segment for you. When we continue, we will have Jason Kamlowski and Fantasy Football Files on the other side of the break. When I come back, I will be previewing Week 5 of the National Football League. You're listening to the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to another Fantasy Football Files on the JK Sports podcast. This is Jason Kamlowski, writer for Dynasty Football Digest. You can find me on Twitter at Jason Kamlowski as always. Going to dive a little bit into Week 4 and then probably talk this week a little bit about guys that I am going to, at the quarter poll, maybe look at buying and selling. Week 4 was kind of one of the first weird weeks of the NFL season where some things maybe we didn't necessarily think were going to happen ended up happening. Obviously, the Buccaneers going into L.A. and just absolutely smashing the Rams, on the back of the defense. And then, Jameis going for 385 and 4 touchdowns. Chris Godwin getting into the mix. Probably didn't see that coming with them making, West Coast road trip into a very good Rams team. Got the Ravens losing at home to the Browns after the Browns just looked terrible last Sunday night against the Rams. You got Oakland jumping out to a big lead in Indianapolis and, kind of beating up on the Colts a little bit. Just one of those weeks where things just didn't really go the way maybe we thought they were going to. DFS this week, I had a lot of Patrick Mahomes, which, typically he's good for, 300 plus and, at least 2 or 3 touchdowns. But, this week did not throw a touchdown pass despite playing in a dome. Probably statistically the worst game that he's had in quite some time. Same thing with some of the other receiving games too. You go down through and you look at some of the guys who topped 100 yards this week. Emmanuel Sanders, Stephon Diggs, which he's just killed Chicago over the years. I mean, that for whatever reason is not really a matchup that he shies away from. He just absolutely kills Chicago over the years. Austin Hooper goes for 100 yards against Tennessee. Jarvis Landry explodes for 167 yards. Jarvis Landry, I thought Odell Beckham would have a good game based on kind of some of the yardage the Ravens have given up and the type of receivers they've given up. Yardage to. I thought Beckham had a chance at kind of a bigger game than Landry, but Landry was the one who kind of capitalized. It seems like the Ravens defense kind of focused a little bit more on Beckham, which, we really shouldn't be surprised by that, right? I mean, you kind of take away the opposing team's best weapon and hope that the ancillary weapons really, can't do much for you. But, the unpredictability of the NFL, sometimes kind of makes these things hard to project, which is why fantasy football, it's, I think, the hardest sport to win at. I just finished up 4 fantasy baseball leagues. I won 3 of them. And really, fantasy baseball is just a grind. 26, 27 weeks of just setting lineups every day and picking up players and dropping players and streaming pitching. And the NFL season it's such a small sample size, and it's hard to make a whole lot of conclusions based on just 3 games. I think we kind of all saw Devontae Adams coming there last Thursday in a smash spot against the Eagles. I mean, just absolutely crushed. Could have a bigger game with a touchdown that, he got tripped up at about the 5-yard line. But things are, I think as we go into the season, you can kind of, we're starting right now to kind of figure out the teams that we can kind of pick on. Tampa Bay is a team, whoever they play, you're probably going to want to start the Tampa Bay or whoever's going against Tampa Bay, their quarterback's an easy start. same thing with Philadelphia. I mean, they've just bled out passing yards this year. Obviously Miami's like the Coors Field of the NFL. I mean, if your guys are playing against Miami, you start them. I mean, end of story. And speaking of teams that played Miami, the Chargers go down there this week, and they win 30-10, which that game was actually close there for a while. But Austin Eckler has just been incredible, and with Melvin Gordon coming back, Austin Eckler is probably not going to be starting much longer, which is really unfortunate because he has had kind of like probably the best year statistically. I saw a stat today on Twitter. If you were just taking into account Austin Eckler's receiving yards for this year, I think he would be like PPR receiver, like the wide receiver 11 in PPR. And that doesn't even take into account, the rushing yards. I mean, he's got 24 receptions this year already for 270 yards. I mean, he's just had an incredible start to the season. 6 touchdowns total already. He's had almost 500 yards total. I mean, he's really on pace to have a big year, which, kind of looking at some of these guys that if you are playing in leagues, especially a dynasty league, I mean, Eckler to me is one of the top buys right now in dynasty because of just the situation with Melvin Gordon coming back. I think a lot of people assume he's going to take a back seat to Gordon, which, maybe that's the case, but whenever I don't know that the Chargers are just going to completely phase him out of the offense. And if he can still pick up 10 to 12 carries a week, or touches a week, especially in PPR leagues, I mean, he can be insanely valuable. And, in a dynasty league, he's going to be a free agent at the end of this year. I think Eckler would be my number one buy right now of all running backs out there, just because I think, you may run into an owner who, is kind of looking at the Gordon thing coming back and thinking, I better get what I can for him right now. But, Austin Eckler is going to cash in this offseason, and he's probably going to go to a team where, maybe he's not a guy who carries the ball 20 gets 20 to 25 touches every week, but I think there's a good chance that he could sign with the team and kind of be their feature guy. So, if you're in a league where you can go out, especially a dynasty league, if you're in a league you can go out like that and buy Austin Eckler, I wouldn't shy away from him in any PPR league as well. But when we're talking about players that we want to buy at the quarter pole of the season, we're kind of looking at guys that have either, recently underperformed in a big way, maybe the last week or two, guys that are hurt right now, guys maybe that, haven't lived up to their draft hype. The first guy that I think I would be looking to buy right now, and honestly, he's probably pretty cheap in one quarterback leagues, and he may be in the waiver wire, is Josh Allen. He went out this week with a concussion. He's thrown more interceptions. He's thrown 6 interceptions and only 3 touchdown passes. But his ceiling is just so high every week because of just the fact that he throws the ball down the field, and he also gives you, the potential for rushing yards. And when you look at the Bills' upcoming schedule, it is so soft. I think he's one of those guys that if you got and get him, I mean, potentially you could be looking at someone who could be a league winner. I mean, check his schedule out. They play the Titans, who just got shredded by Matt Ryan, Dolphins, Eagles, who we've talked about, Redskins, Browns, Dolphins. Those are his next 6 games. So Josh Allen is looking potentially at a nice stretch coming up here, and I talk about this sometimes where I'd rather be the first one off, and but I also sometimes would rather be the first one on. And I think Josh Allen represents an interesting case in terms of a buy candidate, just because he's not really performed up to par as of yet. But he still, to me, hasn't been disgusting. But that rushing floor helps out a bunch. And he's probably on your waiver wire, so you may not have to give up a whole lot to go get him. But, if you're one of those guys that might be looking at streaming quarterbacks, I think Josh Allen is definitely a guy that I would look at. The second guy, and this one's probably going to surprise some people, would be Andy Dalton. This is absolutely a volume play. He is just throwing the ball a ton, but it's mostly because the Bengals are down a ton. He's 4th in the league in attempts right now. Only thrown 5 touchdown passes, but he's doing this without A.J. Green. He right now is 6th in the league in passing yardage. So Andy Dalton is another guy that could present a cheap buy low candidate. Might be free, might be out there on your waiver wire, might not cost you a whole lot. In a dynasty league, I think you could probably get him on the cheap as well. Even a 2-quarterback league, because I just think the perception of Andy Dalton is that he's just just a low ceiling guy. But he's averaging, like I said, 287 yards a game. That's going to play. And once AJ Green gets back, this team's just so bad. Cincinnati's terrible, so they're going to be playing from behind a lot. So I think Dalton, kind of presents a little bit of an interesting, buy candidate right now. Moving on to running backs, and again, the running back situation sometimes is so fluid. Just because, and I've talked about this so many times, these guys just get beat up every week. I think probably the easiest buy candidates out there right now for me, and I was kind of pounding the drum for him in the offseason, has to be Chris Carson. And hear me out on this, because I know the fumbling issues, and I know, he's lost some carries, but he's still involved. He's still in the top 12 in rushing yards. He had a touchdown called back last Sunday. So his line last Sunday should have looked a lot better than what it did. And he topped 100 yards last week, which it was against Arizona. We want to play running backs against Arizona, but 100 yards rushing and 4 receptions for 41 yards. You add a touchdown onto that, and all of a sudden you're looking at a guy, there was over 20 fantasy points in a PPR, and maybe he's not quite as acquirable. So I think Carson presents an interesting case. It's hard in some of these situations. I've already talked about Eckler. I think Eckler's another guy that I'd be checking in on. And I'd hesitate to recommend this guy, but in a PPR, I think he's worth a look, even though, on the ground, he's just not getting, he's averaging like 3.7 yards per carry. But David Johnson, who it looks like he's going to be involved in the passing game. This is probably a PPR play only, but, the Cardinals are trying to get him involved. 8 catches for 99 yards last week. That's going to play every time. He topped 20 fantasy points last week without scoring a touchdown. That's going to play. He's getting, usually he got 17 touches the week before. He got 19 touches last week. Look, I think this Arizona offense, I was probably a little bit too high on them coming into the season. But, Johnson, you might find a panicked David Johnson owner who invested a first-round pick in him and, is kind of ready to bail out. So, maybe test the water on him. And then Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is another guy, and he's kind of in the same boat as David Johnson. He's averaging 3.2 yards per carry, which, again, who didn't kind of see that coming with the Cincinnati offensive line being as bad as they are. Only 11 catches for 52 yards. But again, I think Mixon represents a terrific, especially in Dynasty. He would probably be my number one. If I was going to go after somebody other than Austin Eckler right now, I think Mixon would be my number one Dynasty guy to go and try and buy, just because, he's 23 years old, just turned 23 years old. And, this Bengals team, this is a lost year for the Bengals. But I would say, moving forward, he's definitely a guy capable of being a 3-down back. And if he kind of corrects some of this stuff to get back to his career norms, and it really only takes like 1 week where he just kind of explodes, and he's still getting the volume. He's getting, that 17 to 20 touches. So, the volume's there. He's just not finding the end zone, and he's just not doing a whole lot with it. If he can kind of get going a little bit, Mixon could represent a guy that could potentially be a league winner if you can get him on the cheap. So, I think Joe Mixon is one of those guys that you can kind of look at there too. From a receiver standpoint, again, I think prior to last week I would have said Chris Godwin, but obviously the window is slammed shut on that. And some of these names I'm going to throw out there are kind of crazy, and this is kind of a shoot for the moon kind of situation, but Odell Beckham might be worth looking into. Beckham, I mean, I know some people, Beckham had, they had him as his number one receiver this year coming into the season, but this is kind of what we want. The last 2 weeks he's really disappointed. He had a big week 2 against the Jets, but outside of the 89-yard touchdown reception, even against the Jets, I mean, it's not really been like a huge year for him. Beckham is a guy, though, that kind of has that game breaker ability. So, I mean, he represents an interesting, potential buy low candidate. I mean, he's not going to be a guy that you're going to get like super, super cheap, but I think any kind of a discount that you can get him for represents a tremendous opportunity just because of his ceiling. I mean, some of this would be roster construction with how your team is made up and kind of where you're at. But I would at least be kicking the tires on Odell Beckham this week. Another guy I would be looking hard at would be DJ Moore. Kyle Allen has kind of represented a little bit of an upgrade over Cam Newton. And DJ Moore, they try to get him involved in so many different ways. And the volume hasn't been there the last 2 weeks. But again, especially in a dynasty league, he's just 22. Won't be 23 until April. But if you run into an owner that's trying to compete right now, and you have, I don't know, say like a Larry Fitzgerald maybe, or an Allen Robinson type. Maybe try and go and kick the tires on DJ Moore and see if you can get him at any kind of a discount whatsoever. And then, the last receiver, and again, this is another one that is kind of shooting the moon, is DeAndre Hopkins. Really for DeAndre Hopkins, has been very disappointing this year outside of week 1 against New Orleans. I mean, the last 3 weeks, he's 5 for 40, 6 for 67, 5 for 41, and not scored. I really thought last week he would have a big week. Had him in DFS all over the place. Didn't work out. But, he's another one that you've got to think, he's only got 259 yards after 4 weeks. You've got to think this is going to correct itself and he's going to get back to kind of the career norms. I mean, as long as he's out there and as long as he's playing in that offense, I think with Deshaun Watson being back at quarterback, DeAndre Hopkins go for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns at any given time. So, again, you may not get a huge discount on him, but if you can get him for cheaper than you could 2 weeks ago, he's another guy that potentially could be a league winner if you can get him for the right price. Tight end, I'm not going to make a ton of tight end recommendations only because it's just such a wasteland. Last week I'd say Will Disley was probably the big pickup. Tight end, it's just hard for me to recommend anybody, to target just because there's so much variance with the tight end position. So those are my buys for week 4, kind of at the quarter pole. Just a quick rundown of players I would look to be selling. Number 1 would be Aaron Jones. I think that's probably the most logical one. Anytime a guy is quote unquote the lone wolf in the backfield like he is, I think Aaron Jones, represents a tremendous sell high opportunity because his value may never be higher than it is right now. And I really like Aaron Jones, but he has just not proven to be a reliable option back there for Green Bay. So you might be able to get him, off your roster for more than maybe what you should. Same thing, and I hate to do this because I'm a Dalvin Cook owner, but it just feels like despite the volume, despite everything, Dalvin Cook is a guy I would look to be selling. One guy maybe I didn't mention for the buys would be Ezekiel Elliott, but if you told me that maybe you could trade like a Dalvin Cook for Ezekiel Elliott straight up right now, there's no question I would do that. Or even like Dalvin Cook for Alvin Kamara straight up right now, like no question I would do that. And that might be the type of deal you're able to swing for Dalvin Cook right now. And I think those are the type of deals you need to be looking at that could potentially pay dividends, in the long game for your team this year, is to try to do that because I worry every week about Dalvin Cook's health. I think he's injury prone. Hopefully he proves me wrong because, like I said, I am a Dalvin Cook owner this year. But if I could go get one of those guys, even Saquon, as he gets closer to coming back from his own injury, any of those guys that you could trade up for and, take advantage of the fact that Cook has had just such a hard start. That would definitely be, something I would be looking to do. From a receiver standpoint, and I love him, and he's, I had him in DFS 2 weeks ago when he went off. But I think a guy, that you got to kind of maybe be looking at is Keenan Allen, because when Melvin Gordon comes back and Mike Williams gets healthy, Keenan Allen's thing is he's kind of ripped off like all these like high target games. And what the Dolphins is, they did was essentially triple team him to keep him from getting the ball at all. And it kind of worked because it's not like the Chargers were just scoring points on points on points. I mean, they ended up scoring 30 points, but who doesn't score 30 points against Miami? So I think, based on what he's done, I think Keenan Allen could be a guy that maybe you could get more than what he's worth. And then the other guy, obviously Mohamed Sanu has just went ham. He's actually right now, he has more catches right now than Julio Jones does, albeit for less yards. But Sanu's just out there, catching 24 balls over 4 games. I don't see any way that keeps up. So if you can get anything at all of value from Mohamed Sanu, I would definitely look into doing that. And I think, as much as we talked up Jarvis Landry, I think he's another one that I'd be looking to try to capitalize on the big game that he just had. Dump Jarvis Landry, the 18.2 yards per reception. That's not sustainable for this guy. His ADOT is insanely low over his career. And he's not going to take too many passes 65 yards to the house. So, I'd be looking to sell Landry. If I owned Austin Hooper, I'd probably be looking to maybe move Austin Hooper if I thought I could upgrade, at the tight end spot. Same thing with Evan Ingram, because, with Golden Tate coming back, I think all bets are probably off for Evan Ingram and everybody in that Giants passing game, even though Daniel Jones is now in the picture. So that's just a few, buy low, sell high candidates that I've got for this week. Just a quick rundown of where my teams are at. My biggest money league right now, I'm sitting at 3-1, but I do have Dalvin Cook and Chris Godwin on that team. But right now I'm actively looking to move Dalvin Cook to try to pick up 2 pieces. I've also got David Johnson on that team, so it's kind of an interesting roster construction there. But I think right now, when you're 4 weeks in, is the time to start looking, because you got some teams right now. If they're 1-3 or 0-4, they've got to do something. It's desperation time for some of these teams. It's no different than the real NFL. If a team's 1-3 or 0-4 right now, their season's on the brink. So, be going to those teams, look at their rosters, see if you can get anybody, from them that could be helpful to you down the stretch. Try to swing a deal where maybe you do a 2-for-1. If they've got a stud and you've got 2 really solid guys, do a 2-for-1 to try to, upgrade their team. And try to do what you can to put yourself in position to get into the playoffs, because honestly in fantasy football, to me, all bets are off once you're there. So I hope you guys had a good week 4. I wish you best of luck in week 5. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Jason Kamlowski. Just want to thank Josh for having me on as usual. He is probably getting ready, if he's not in Nats Park right now, to see the wild card game and Max Scherzer. I'm recording this on Tuesday evening. If he's not there already, he's probably getting ready to be there. But have a great week 5, and I'll see you guys back here again next week for week 6. See ya.
The Josh Kirby on Sports podcast, part of the Mayo Please podcast network, is sponsored by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you grab a bag today inside your local Martin's, Food Lion, and Giant stores. And our new sponsor and fellow sports fans at PM Plus Reserves, providing reserve studies for homeowner and condominium associations in the Washington metropolitan area for the past 30 years. Make sure you check us out on all streaming platforms via the Mayo Please and the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. You can also find the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, along with the Mayo Please on Twitter. Have any questions for the show? Feel free to shoot us an email at kirbyonsports@gmail.com.
Alrighty, back with you on the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. As always, thank you to Jason Kamlowski for Fantasy Football Files. Another great segment by him, so make sure you check him out at Jason Kamlowski on Twitter and Dynasty Football Digest. As you heard from Jason, yes, I am finishing up this recording the morning after the wild card game the Nationals and the Brewers, which I had the opportunity to be at. You can catch all my coverage on the Josh Kirby on Sports Facebook and Twitter page, along with some stuff on Instagram. But very, very, very exciting game. I won't go deep in depth about it because we have another show next week. I'll get to it more and give you some more MLB playoff matchups to look out for. But very great game, down 3-1 in the beginning, and then coming back to win 4-3 in that ball game. They move on to play the Los Angeles Dodgers on Thursday, tomorrow, as we are recording this on Wednesday. So before we wrap things up, let's dive in to a Week 5 preview. The Thursday night matchup, it's going to be key for Los Angeles to bounce back against this all-right Seattle team. The Rams facing Seattle. I think that's in Seattle, too, so that's going to be tough. You got Jacksonville and Carolina, Atlanta and Houston. Atlanta's really struggling, and Houston didn't get the win last week either, so that might be a close game. Arizona and Cincinnati, Tampa Bay and New Orleans. You got Minnesota and New York with Daniel Jones right back in there with Eli Manning being benched. Daniel Jones, not an exceptional week last week against Washington, but he got the job done. Chicago and Oakland, you have the Jets and the Eagles. Another division match of the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Buffalo and Tennessee. Washington against the defending Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. You got Denver and Los Angeles Chargers, the Packers and the Cowboys. That's going to be a very interesting matchup. The Colts and the Chiefs. I'm very excited to see how this game will play out with Patrick Mahomes and how they struggled a little bit, almost losing to the Rams, but with all those lead changes. How's Jacoby Brissett going to play in this game, too? Then wrapping up Monday night with a Cleveland-San Francisco matchup with bye weeks for Miami and Detroit. So that's Week 5 for you. And that about wraps up this episode of the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. As always, I thank you so much for tuning in each and every week. We're sponsored by Route 11 Chips, PM Plus Reserves, and we are part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, to MPT Now Productions, Dave Johnson, and JR Beats Official, as always, for everything. And until next week, we say so long and peace out.